Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to my video blog. My name is Raymond Tucker, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about a study that I recently completed. I'll give you a little bit of information about myself, what the study was, what we found, and generally where we're trying to go from here. So first off, I'm a third year, about to be a fourth year, in the Clinical Psychology PhD program here at Oklahoma State University. You can see our letters there on our flags. We are very proud Cowboys here. You can also see our letters here on one of our research posters. I'm also the lab manager for the Laboratory of the Study of Suicide Risk and Resilience. Here is all of our current graduate students. Again, very proud Cowboys. We're giving our best Pistol Pete Pokes impressions there. So, the study that I'll talk about today was generously funded by a couple organizations that I first want to acknowledge and say thank you. First, the Active Minds organization. It's a great organization changing the conversation about mental health on college campuses, but nationwide. If you're on a college campus, I would recommend trying to look them up. I bet you'd find them on your college campus, but they're easily searchable online. So the fellowship that I received from Active Minds is called the Emerging Scholars Fellowship, and this money is given to us through the Scattergood Foundation for Behavioral Health. And I am extremely, extremely thankful for both these organizations and the opportunity to run this study, which I think is really interesting. But I didn't necessarily do this alone. Of course, research usually isn't done alone. I have a project mentor here at Oklahoma State. She's my advisor for all of my research. Her name's Dr. Larica Wingate. And she runs our lab, and we generally look at risk and resiliency factors for suicidal ideation and suicide in generally mainly college students. I've been working with Dr. Wingate all 3 of my years, and she was my project mentor for this specific project as well. One of the great things about Emerging Scholars Fellowships is that they give you, or they set you up with mentors in the field that are some of the maybe most respected professionals in the field that you're working on. So my project here broadly looks at how one's humor use may protect them from depression and suicidal thinking. And Emerging Scholars actually set me up with 2 leading experts in humor research. The first and my primary mentor is Dr. Nicholas Kuiper, who's done a lot of research looking at humor styles and humor use as resiliency variables and important factors to be thinking about when considering a client's or just general people's emotional well-being. My secondary mentor was also Dr. Rod Martin. And Dr. Martin literally wrote the book on humor. I often cite his book, The Psychology of Humor, in most of my work. And so I'm generally very appreciative of working with both of these. Both these individuals gotten great feedback from both of them, as well as my campus mentor, Dr. Wingate. So the project that we completed was looking at how one's humor content, the content of humor use, may be protective against symptoms of depression and suicidal ideation in college students. And we wanted to look at that based on about a decade of research looking at 2 positive humor styles, general situations in humor that people use that seem to be protective against indicators of negative emotional well-being. So let me give you a little background about those 2 humor styles. The first is affiliative humor. And affiliative humor is humor used to strengthen social bonds and decrease interpersonal tensions. And so I use this picture because I like these guys. They seem like they're laughing a little bit, and then one guy's got his hand on his shoulder. Probably an affiliative act, and this could have been a situation where affiliative humor may have been used. The second humor style is self-enhancing humor. And so I like this picture to describe self-enhancing, as you can see these individuals in their meeting are laughing and smiling. If you're anything like me, I've definitely been in some meetings where it's really hard to keep a humorous outlook on life when you're in some of these meetings. That's exactly what self-enhancing humor style is keeping a positive, humorous outlook on life, especially during stressful or negative situations. So these humor styles are assessed through the Humor Styles Questionnaire, and it's pretty awesome to say that the author of the Humor Styles Questionnaire assessment measure is actually Dr. Rod Martin, so I am definitely working with an expert in the field there. And I really like the research done with these humor styles, but one thing I'm hoping to add to an understanding of a person's humor style is also what is the content of the humor being used. So when you look at these, the 2 humor styles that I discussed, very little discussion is made about what is the actual humor use? So in the self-enhancing humor style, is the humor about what's being stressful or what the negative event is in that case, or is it something unrelated? With affiliative humor, is affiliative humor related to something that the two individuals are going through together, or is it something they're going through separate? Is content of humor within these humor styles potentially important? And that's what this study is starting to create. Hopefully will create a little discussion in the literature about whether or not the content of the humor is all that important. So for the study, we developed and furthered some work from Dr. Matthew Ansfield, who is actually my undergraduate advisor at Lawrence University, looking at two humor contents. The first being distress-focused humor. So distress-focused humor would be humor use that is topically related to something that's currently distressing. So in the case of somebody who is stressed out about a test, they may be making a college student stressed out about a test. They might make jokes about the test, about how hard they've studied. So it's topically related to what's stressing them out in the moment. I really like Louis C.K. I enjoy his stand-up. It's very dark, but I think it does demonstrate a little bit of an idea of distress-focused humor. And I like this quote that he says here. It's a positive thing to talk about terrible things and make people laugh about them. And this is generally, I think, reflective of a distress-focused humor content, is taking something that is distressing or terrible, making jokes about it, and maybe it makes these situations easier and more easy to cope through. The second humor content is really topically the exact opposite. It is distracting humor. And I like Homer here. He's looking pretty distracted. So distracting humor would be in that stressful situation. Let's say that student again is taking that test, where distress-focused humor might be about the test, about how much they've studied, about what it'll mean for their grades if they do bad or well. Distracting humor would be something completely unrelated, about the weather, about the NBA finals, whatever it might be, completely unrelated to the distressful event that they're going through at that time. And so in this current study, we wanted to look at if the general use of these humor contents in college students are related to symptoms of depression as well as suicidal thinking. So our lab is again, very interested in understanding positive psychological variables that may help people be resilient against suicidal desire and thoughts of suicide or wanting to end one's own life. And we thought that both of these humor styles would likely be protective against suicidal thinking and depression, and I'll give you a couple reasons why here in a second. But we also wanted to see if maybe one was more protective or more negatively associated with suicidal thinking and symptoms of depression in college students. So we thought we thought distress-focused humor would be protective, in that people who naturally use distress-focused humor when distressed are less likely to be experiencing depressive symptoms, because one of the common cognitive therapies for depression is out of Beck's cognitive model, or cognitive therapy for depression. And one of the skills laden in this therapy is the idea of cognitive reframing. So this is taking a stressor and taking any sort of negative cognitions you may have about it and reframing it to be more positive in nature, the thinking about the stressor is more positive. Again, you can see that with the idea of problem being crossed out and opportunity being wrote on here. I kind of like this example of what cognitive reframing can look like. In the case of a deadline, a stressor, some individuals may start having the thought of, I'll never finish this in time, I'll lose my job, and that creates feelings of being overwhelmed and anxious. Cognitive reframing, it helps individuals take a look at this stressor in a different way, looking at, can anybody help, the fact that they usually get things done, so it'll probably get done, and that often results in more positive outcomes, things like looking at the problem or the deadline as a challenge instead of a problem, and people are generally a little bit more hopeful and resilient here. So we thought that distress-focused humor may do the same thing. It may help individuals sort of reframe what is the distressing event that they're going through. Maybe help them see that things maybe aren't as bad as their kind of emotions are leading them to feel. We also thought distracting humor, though, although really topically completely opposite of distress focus, may also be helpful, as humor generally is shown to be a nice distracting method and seems to be helpful to decreasing symptoms of stress and anxiety and depression. But we also know that one of our strongest treatments for the chronically suicidal is dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT, developed by Marsha Linehan. And one of the elements of DBT is helping these individuals disengage and get away from ruminative, obsessive thoughts that may drive some of their desire for death. And so here is this picture of the distracting skill, or distracting your mind in DBT, to get some of the relief from obsessive ruminative thoughts. And the idea that, we can cognitively reframe some of these thoughts, but if someone's really stuck in their own head, it's really difficult to try to change these. Maybe it's more helpful to get somebody engaged with positive activities in line with their values, to get them away from these thoughts and get them disengaged, and maybe that is just as beneficial. So then, in this case, maybe distracting humor, again, serves that sort of distracting role that DBT talks about in combination with ruminative and obsessive thoughts. So, in order to test these hypotheses, we recruited college students on our campus to complete a study. Here are our college students. These are fictional college students. These are not students that we worked with, of course, but they've got their notebooks and stuff. They look like they're going to class. And in order to recruit these students, we utilize what we call our pre-screener, our pre-screener on campus. So all students who are eligible to participate in research have to take a pre-screen analysis at the beginning of each semester. What this is a series of questionnaires that get totaled up, and researchers can then recruit participants that sort of fit certain groups. So in our case, with the pre-screener, we added a screener for depressive symptoms. And that way we could recruit two groups of college students. The first group being those who are low in symptoms of depression. We got our happy fingers here. So that was one of our groups of college students. They screened on this 20-item measure, they screened low in symptoms of depression. We also recruited a group of college students who are in the kind of clinical range of symptoms of depression. They're showing that they're elevated in symptoms of depression, and they may be experiencing enough symptoms of clinical depression to potentially be diagnosed if they were given a full evaluation. So we recruited those two groups, and we had them fill out surveys and questionnaires of our study variables. And not surprising, we actually needed to create a survey for the distress-focused and distracting humor. So we did this, and this was actually quite a long process, and really my first time diving into creating a scale where we created a multimodal scale of distress-focused and distracting humor. So we asked participants questions about their natural use of these humor contents, when they're feeling sad. So we asked participants to think of the last time that they were feeling really sad or distressed, and then asked questions such as, when you're feeling sad and distressed, are you likely to use humor that is related to what is making you feel sad? We asked self-report questions about comfort using both of these humor contents as well as the frequency of use. We also included 5 short vignettes of fictional characters that were using these humor contents. So I'll give you an example of one. One of the vignettes was about Donald. Donald, I believe, was 52, and he was sad because he just dropped his son off at the airport, and he's being deployed overseas. So he's feeling sad and a little lonely because he won't have his son for a year or two. On the way home, he hears a really awful ad on the radio, and he makes a joke. And the participants were presented with 2 different punchlines. A distress-focused punchline. So in this vignette, I believe the punchline was about how lucky his son is that he'll never have to listen to these awful commercials while he's overseas. Again, a joke about what's making Donald distressed at that time. And then a distracting humor about I think something about how Donald would rather run 50 miles or something like that instead of listen to these again, that commercial again. So the humor punchlines are given so the participants can choose which one they're more likely to use or how comfortable they would be using the distress-focused punchline and then the distracting punchline. We also included surveys of symptoms of depression and suicidal thinking, and all these were administered through an online software called Qualtrics. I'm also very thankful for the Qualtrics subscription here on campus because we often utilize it, and it really makes my life a lot easier. So if you're a researcher out there and you're looking for a good online data plan or data capture plan, Qualtrics might be really helpful for you. So what we found was the distress focus and distracting humor contents are not necessarily independent or orthogonal. It can be that an individual may use both humor contents or may feel comfortable using both humor contents. We found a positive association or correlation between the two humor styles. So the more comfortable you are using distress focused humor, the more comfortable you also are using distracting humor. So it didn't seem like the students were doing one or the other, or more comfortable or more likely use one or the other. We also found a general negative correlation between distracting humor and symptoms of depression, as well as distress-focused humor and symptoms of depression. This means that the naturalistic use, the more likely these students are to use each of these humor contents, the less likely they were to be experiencing symptoms of depression, generally giving the idea that maybe both are somewhat protective against depressive symptoms in college students. I will mention that the correlation coefficient between the two contents and depression were about the same. So it didn't necessarily seem that one could be more protective than the other. They seem to be about the most. So maybe the content of humor really doesn't necessarily matter in this situation. It's just any humor use when sad is potentially helpful. As far as the relationship between the humor contents and suicidal thinking, very little actually emerged. One thing we did find was what we call a trending significant correlation, and I laugh about this because my stats teacher jokes about how do we know something is trending towards significance? Do we know that it's not running away from significance? So we're not really too sure about this result, but it might be that more distress-focused humor, that naturally using that humor that's based off of what's driving feelings of sadness in these college students is actually related to less suicidal thinking. Whereas distracting humor was actually unrelated. We didn't see a relationship there. It didn't seem protective at all. So with that correlation being said, we do want to continue to gather some more data to see if that finding is erroneous, if maybe that's just an abnormality in the data, or if this is actually just a small effect. Some more data may help us find that out. So we're pretty interested in those results, and we're interested in continuing and working on. It is, of course, important to notice, though, that like any study, there are definitely some limitations here that we want to keep in mind. We have some leashes, all right? We can't necessarily run away with this thing quite yet. We generally had what we call a low-risk sample, and we often find this with college students. We had a lot of students that really want to live, and that's the natural inclination of students in college campuses, is that there's not a lot of suicidal ideation when we generally sample. It's pretty low base rate. With us trying to get a group of people experiencing elevated levels of depression, we expected to get a little bit more suicidal thinking within our sample, but that didn't necessarily happen. So we want to continue our work with trying to recruit college students who are specifically thinking about suicide, not just those who are maybe elevated in depression, to try to get an idea again of if these humor styles are protective against suicidal thinking. We would also like to start interviewing college students and trying to give diagnoses instead of just relying on self-report screener measures like we did for this study. So we would then be able to give some information of, are these humor contents not only protective against symptoms of depression and suicidal thinking, but what about diagnoses of major depressive disorder or any sort of affective disorders that we might want to look at? Those are important limitations to think about and where we would like to go from there potentially. So again, that does transition nicely into my future directions idea here. So any good researcher should be thinking about where they can take their research next. Of course, we want to build on our limitations or fix our limitations of this study by continuing on this research. As we're finding some general relationships here, it may be important to continue working on and seeing if we can bolster our study and decrease some of our limitations and still find some of these results. We would also potentially like to start looking at these humor contents in different sort of affective states or different emotional states. So in this study, we only looked at distress-focused humor and distracting humor when people are feeling sad. And we asked them if they like to use humor about what's driving their sadness or the fact that they're feeling so sad. it could be that these humor contents are more or less protective against different affective states. So take, for example, this person who I can only guess is a graduate student, judging by how she is looking stressed at her computer. Looking at how these humor contents are used in individuals who are extremely stressed, extremely anxious, or maybe even angry, and looking at how these humor contents may, again, be protective against symptoms of disorders, maybe depression, anxiety, or maybe even things like emotional outbursts, if we're looking at those who are angry, looking at some different outcomes and how these humor contents may be at play. We also, of course, then want to start looking at how these humor contents relate to these well-established humor styles in the literature. Is it possible that some sort of interaction between a certain humor content, let's say distress-focused, and a certain humor style, let's say self-enhancing humor, seem to be the most protective? It's the two things added together. So if you're likely to use self-enhancing humor and the content is likely to be distress-focused, whatever is naturally stressful or rough to go through in that moment, maybe that's one of the best coping mechanisms through humor. That's just hypothetical. That's just a potential study that we would like to start looking at. We hope our research heads that way, and we love to collaborate with humor researchers that are thinking some of the same ideas or want to test some of these things. So I hope you enjoyed this video blog. That generally wraps up who I am, what our study was. Again, I want to thank Active Minds, the Emerging Scholars Fellowship, the Scattergood Foundation, as well as my mentors, Dr. Ulrika Wingate, Dr. Nicholas Kuiper, Dr. Rod Martin, and the Laboratory for the Study of Suicide Risk and Resilience, all of my fellow graduate students who really are very helpful getting this research done. If you have any questions, I'm easily found on the Oklahoma State website. My email should be up there, as well as and I would love it if you stop by the Emerging Scholars website and checked out my blog that's really been following this research since day one till today. You can definitely see some progress while we're creating these measures and looking at the data for the first time. Definitely some different things going on that might be interesting if you're really interested in these humor contents. So thanks again, and please reach out if you have any questions.